It's a small thing, a piece of candy, unwrapped without thinking, gone before you notice you reached for it. You didn't plan it, you didn't even taste the first half. Nothing about that moment feels like history. It feels like nothing, just a habit, a small itch answered without a second thought. But your tongue just did something ancient. The receptors that lit up the second that sweetness hit are running code older than your species. Older than primates as we know them. Older than the ground you're standing on. So when did humans start craving sugar? It sounds like a question with a clean answer. A date, a place, a first taste. It doesn't have one. The real answer is stranger than that, because the craving showed up tens of millions of years before sugar itself ever did. We didn't invent this hunger, we inherited it. If you want to know where instincts like this actually come from, hit subscribe. This channel exists to answer exactly that. Go back 40 million years. No humans yet, no apes as you'd recognize them, just small, quick-eyed primates moving through a humid forest that once covered what is now the Egyptian desert. Every single day, one decision keeps repeating itself. Food is scattered everywhere, but not all food is equal. Some of it is hard. Nuts, tough seeds, fibrous bark. Cracking it takes energy, time, risk. Other food is soft, ripe, sugary fruit hanging low, practically falling into open hands. Here's the part most people miss. Hard food is what scientists call protected calories. The plant is defending its energy, wrapping it in shells and fibers so it costs you something to get it. Sweet fruit is the opposite. It's an open invitation. The plant wants you to eat it, seeds and all, then walk off and drop those seeds somewhere new. Sugar in nature is a bribe, and a body that says yes to that bribe wins. Less effort spent chewing, more energy banked, more chances to survive the next lean season. This is the choice sitting in front of every one of your ancient ancestors, generation after generation, for millions of years straight. The ones who leaned towards sweet, soft, easy calories weren't lazy, they were efficient. And efficiency over deep enough time becomes wiring, which raises the real question. Did the fossil record actually back this up? Or is this just a nice story? It turns out teeth don't lie. Teeth don't lie. They can't. Long after everything else about an animal has rotted away, its teeth are still sitting there in the rock, keeping an honest record of exactly what it chewed for a lifetime. That's what drew researcher Ian Tao, along with Matthew Borths and Carolina Locke, into a stretch of Egyptian desert known as the Fayum Depression. 40 to 29 million years ago, this was thick forest. Today, it's one of the richest fossil beds on Earth for early primates. They examined 421 teeth pulled from 5 different primate species that once lived side by side in that ancient canopy, and the pattern that showed up was almost too consistent to ignore. Barely 5% of these teeth showed the kind of chipping you'd expect from cracking hard nuts or tough seeds day after day. If these animals had been grinding through armored, defended food as a main strategy, that damage should have been everywhere. It wasn't. Instead, a different kind of evidence kept turning up: cavities. Signs of dental decay consistent with a diet high in soft, sugar-rich fruit. In other words, the teeth are telling us these early primates weren't built like nutcrackers. They were built like fruit specialists. And that single detail rewrites the assumption most people carry around without ever questioning it. The idea that our earliest ancestors were tough, hardy survivors chewing through whatever the forest could throw at them. The truth sitting in that rock says otherwise. And it gets stranger once you look at what's happening inside the mouth itself, at the genetic level. Here's what most people assume about early human ancestors: tough, rugged, built on hard survival food, meat, bone marrow, whatever could be cracked open with force. That image feels right. It matches the word primitive. Strong jaws, brute strength, survival of the fittest, in the most literal, muscular sense. But the teeth just told you something different. And once you actually follow that evidence instead of the assumption, the whole story flips. The foundation of the primate lineage, the one you eventually descended from, wasn't built on hard, defended food. It was built on soft, sweet, easy to digest fruit. That's not the exception in the story. That's the starting point. This matters because survival of the fittest doesn't mean the strongest, the toughest, or the hardest chewing animal wins. It means whatever strategy burns less energy for more return wins. And picking soft, sugar-rich fruit over hard, defended nuts was the efficient move, every single time for millions of years. So the animals we call soft were never the weak link in the story. They were the ones actually running the smart strategy. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. That strategy never got deleted. It's still sitting inside your brain right now, unchanged, thousands of generations later. Every time sugar hits your tongue and your brain lights up like a reward has just landed, that's not a modern glitch. That's 40 million years of a winning strategy, still running exactly as designed. Fruit was easy compared to what came later, but easy didn't mean guaranteed. Fruiting season never lasts long. Ripe branches become a battleground. Birds, insects, rival primates all racing for the same narrow window before that sugar peak passes and the fruit drops or spoils on the vine. In that competition, an animal wired to chase sweetness hard had a real edge, but only if it could actually locate that fruit fast and often enough for it to count. In that kind of race, hesitation loses. An animal wired to want sweetness badly and to want it fast had a real advantage, but only if it could actually locate that fruit quickly, before every competing mouth in the canopy got there first. Fruit rewarded speed. Honey rewarded something else entirely: risk. Move the clock forward, into Africa, into the world of early hominins. Fruit gave sugar in small, scattered doses, but one food source packed more concentrated energy into a single sitting than anything else nearby, and it came guarded: honey. A single wild hive could deliver more sugar in minutes than a full day spent chasing fruit. That's exactly why it was worth chasing. But it sat locked behind real danger, climbing barehanded into a tree, straight into a colony of insects built to defend it. This isn't theory. On a rock wall in Spain, at a site called Cueva de la Araña, there's a painting somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years old. The precise date still debated, the scene itself unmistakable. A human figure hangs from a vine, reaching into a wild hive while bees swarm around him. That image is proof. People were willing to risk real pain for a mouthful of concentrated sugar. The craving you feel tonight used to come with a price tag written in stings. For millions of years, the rule never changed. If you wanted something sweet, you went out and found it. You waited for fruiting season. You risked the bees. Sugar was something the world handed out on its own schedule, not yours. Then, somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 years ago in New Guinea, that rule broke. People stopped only searching. They started planting. Sugarcane, cut and replanted, cultivated on purpose instead of stumbled upon by luck. Early on, there was no refining process, no crystals, nothing close to what sits in your kitchen today. People simply cut the cane and chewed it raw, working the fibrous stalk with their teeth, pulling the sweet juice out, then spitting out what was left. That single shift changes everything about the story. Sugar stopped being a reward you had to hunt for. It became a crop. Something you could grow on your own terms, harvest on a schedule, and keep coming back to. The chase was over. The supply had just started catching up to the craving. Chewing raw cane was one thing. What happened next in India was something else entirely. Someone figured out how to boil cane juice down, let it cool, and coax it into something new. Solid crystals that didn't spoil, didn't rot, didn't need to be consumed on the spot. Exactly when this happened is still genuinely contested. Some historians place it as early as the 5th century BCE. Others push it as late as the Gupta period, roughly the 4th century CE. The date is up for debate. What it meant is not. A liquid that spoiled within days had just been turned into something solid, storable, and tradable. In Sanskrit, this new substance was named sharkara, meaning grit or gravel. That word is the direct root of the word you use today, sugar. And once sugar could be stored, it could travel. Sailors were carrying it towards southern China by around 500 BCE. Centuries later, in the 7th century CE, Chinese envoys traveled all the way to India specifically to learn refining methods after the Tang emperor took a personal interest in the crop himself. From there, it kept moving toward Persia and eventually into the Mediterranean world, arriving in Europe as something closer to a spice or a medicine than a food. For most of history, that's exactly what sugar was. Rare, expensive, something the wealthy hoarded and the sick were prescribed in small, careful doses. Nothing about it was ordinary yet. Nothing about it was everywhere. That part was still centuries away, and it wouldn't arrive quietly. Sugar was scarce for most of human history, but scarcity itself left a strange fingerprint. Not in any written record, but literally inside the teeth of the dead. Here's the popular version of this story. The one you've probably heard before. Hunter-gatherers had strong, healthy teeth. Then farming showed up, grain became the staple, and human mouths fell apart. There's real evidence behind that idea. Across multiple bioarchaeological studies, from Natufian hunter-gatherers in the ancient Levant to Neolithic farmers in China and Ukraine, researchers have found a consistent pattern. As populations shifted toward intensive farming, especially grain-based farming, rates of dental cavities tended to climb. The biology behind that makes sense. Starchy grain breaks down into fermentable sugar right there in the mouth, feeding the same bacteria that thrive on sugar itself. Different source, same effect. But here's where the story most people repeat starts to crack. In 2019, a reanalysis published in Current Anthropology went back and actually tested this narrative against the full dataset. And the picture that came back was far messier than the clean version everyone likes to tell. Cavity rates between farmers and hunter-gatherers overlapped by more than 70%. Climate turned out to matter just as much as diet in some cases, sometimes more. In other words, the tidy image of cavity-free hunter-gatherers giving way to rotten-toothed farmers is true only in the broadest sense. Up close, the line blurs almost completely. Even one of the most repeated claims in nutrition writing turns out to be an oversimplification. And if farming alone can't explain the real damage to human teeth, something else has to. That scarcity left a strange mark on human bodies. Not in any written record, in the teeth of the dead. Here's the story most people already believe. Hunter-gatherers had strong, clean teeth. Then farming arrived, grain became the daily staple, and human mouths started falling apart. It's a tidy story. It's also the story researchers went looking to test. Across multiple bioarchaeological studies, scientists examined the teeth of ancient populations from very different parts of the world. Natufian hunter-gatherers from the ancient Levant, Neolithic farming communities in China, and Neolithic farmers in Ukraine. And a pattern did show up, though not a perfectly consistent one. As these groups shifted toward intensive farming, especially farming built around grain, rates of dental cavities tended to rise. That result lines up with basic biology. Starchy, processed grain doesn't stay starch for long once it's in your mouth. It breaks down into fermentable sugar almost immediately, feeding the exact same bacteria that thrive on sugar itself. Different source, same damage. But here's where the clean version of this story starts to fall apart. In 2019, a reanalysis published in the journal Current Anthropology went back and tested this claim directly against the full body of evidence, and what it found was far messier than the popular version. Cavity rates between farming populations and hunter-gatherer populations overlapped by more than 70%. Climate turned out to be just as influential as diet in some cases, in others even more so. So the image most people carry around, pristine, cavity-free hunter-gatherers replaced by rotten-toothed farmers, is only true in the broadest average. Look closely at individual populations and that clean line almost disappears. Even farming ruined our teeth, one of the most repeated claims in popular nutrition writing today, turns out to be an oversimplification dressed up as settled fact. If farming alone can't explain the damage, then something else has to. And the answer comes from one of the most elegant pieces of research in this entire story. In 2013, a team led by geneticist Christina Adler didn't study bones, they studied plaque. The same sticky film building up on your teeth right now, except in this case plaque that had calcified into a hard mineral called calculus and survived on ancient teeth for thousands of years. They pulled samples from 34 skeletons spanning roughly 7,500 years of European history, and locked inside that hardened plaque was something remarkable: fossilized bacterial DNA, a frozen snapshot of exactly what species of bacteria were living inside these people's mouths at each point in history. The first result was exactly what you'd expect. When farming began in the early Neolithic, the oral bacteria shifted toward a less healthy, more disease-associated community. That matches everything you've already heard about grain and cavities. But then the data does something nobody was expecting. From that early agricultural shift all the way up to roughly 400 years ago, the oral microbiome barely moved. Thousands of years, different empires, different diets, different regions, almost total stability. Then the Industrial Revolution hit, and in barely 2 centuries, the shift was sharper, faster, and larger than anything the previous 10,000 years of farming had produced. This is the point where the cavity-causing bacteria considered normal in modern mouths finally took over. Read that comparison again. 10,000 years of agriculture, a real but modest shift. 200 years of industrialization, a bigger one. Something happened in that short window powerful enough to outweigh the accumulated dietary change of an entire era. What happened was supply. Sugar stopped being something you risked a cliff face for or paid a fortune to import across an ocean. It became something manufactured at industrial scale on vast Caribbean plantations, worked by forced and enslaved labor, then shipped to Europe in volumes no earlier century could have imagined. Anthropologist Sidney Mintz captured the scale of that shift in a single number. British sugar consumption per person rose from roughly 4 pounds a year in 1700 to 18 pounds a year by 1800, a four-fold increase inside 1 century. That surge wasn't driven by human biology suddenly changing. It was driven by an economic system built on suffering most of those consumers never saw, never questioned, and never had to. Your body didn't get faster at wanting sugar, the world just got faster at supplying it. That's the real rupture in this story. Not the moment some ancient primate first tasted a piece of ripe fruit, not the moment a person on a cliff face in Spain risked a fall to rob a wild hive, not even the invention of crystallized sugar in ancient India. The rupture is barely 200 years old. The moment an ancient craving carried across tens of millions of years of evolution was finally handed an endless, cheap, year-round supply of exactly what it had always been asking for. Your body was never built for that supply. It was built for scarcity, for a world where sweetness meant a lucky piece of ripe fruit or a dangerous climb toward a guarded hive, a handful of times a year at most. The craving is ancient. The abundance is not. And almost everything sugar does to you now, the cravings that feel bottomless, the sense you can never quite get enough, comes from that mismatch, not from some flaw in your willpower. Which brings you back to that piece of candy. Small, forgettable. It isn't asking anything hard of you anymore. It just needs you to reach for it, the way your biology was built to do long before there were humans doing the reaching. If you made it this far, hit subscribe. See you in the next one.